So hey, it's Jordan, Ancient Literature Dude, back to babble with you once again. And the question I have for you today is, what is the earliest story you can remember? And I ask this because I've been thinking about it myself and thinking about how deeply influential these early stories can tend to be on us as young people. We may not even know it, we may not realize it at the time, but I think we carry the lessons of the stories forward with us in life, and I think they shape our tastes and our worldview and things like that. And of course, in the specifics, we may not even remember exactly what the first story we were exposed to would have been, right? Because we tend to be very young when we experience them. But in my own childhood, the only or the first things that I can remember being told were the stories of Brer Rabbit and the Billy Goat's Gruff, and they were told to me by my father, and I loved them. I was very amused by them, and of course, I think they kind of imparted on me these lessons about outwitting your opponent and brain triumphing over brawn and things like that, without my even realizing it. And I think that because obviously they were folklore based and ultimately kind of deriving from mythology and things like that, it kind of inwardly cultivated my interest in things like folklore and mythology. That whole story model, that kind of archetypal story of the trickster and outwitting your opponent and things like that. So I really loved it. Going forward a little bit later, and I'm revealing once again my childhood of the '80s syndrome. The next thing that I really got into was HeMan, the cartoon, HeMan and the Masters of the Universe. Absolutely loved it, to the point that apparently I think legend has it that my first word was HeMan, which I think still gives my mom fits to this day, because I think that I said that before supposedly legitimately anything else from what I'm told. I don't know if it's true or not, but it sounds funny. And I had trouble speaking, so I didn't just say "He-Man." I had to kind of take a deep breath and try to belt it out. But anyway, I loved He-Man. The swords and sorcery and the fantasy element, and I loved the whole the idea that he has to transform. I mean, that's how can you not look at the magical sword and not make the King Arthur parallels and all these different mythological and superhero parallels that you could form. Just absolutely loved it. Loved Skeletor as a villain. I think it's one of the reasons that I like kind of cheesy, over the top villains to this day. I mean, villains are great when they're humanized and you can understand them. I love Magneto, for example, but I mean, give me Ganondorf any day. I like villains that just want to rampage and destroy things and laugh evilly. Nothing better than an evil laugh, right? But I loved He-Man. The first movie that I really got into, that I can remember, was again '80s thing here, Ghostbusters. You get into the comedic stuff, which is still very important to me. I may not always make it clear, but I'm a goofball, and I love just kind of cornball humor. I thought Bill Murray and the crew were great in Ghostbusters, and Ghostbusters was probably the first thing that I got into that had that kind of a team aspect. It had the camaraderie, and learning to trust one another and things like that. And even though it was presented in a funny way, it was getting across some pretty serious stuff, and it was dealing with the supernatural and ghosts and horror and things like that, even with the comedy element. And that's something that I really got into later with H.P. Lovecraft and Edgar Allan Poe and, whatever ghost stories and, horrors from mythology that I got fascinated by later in life. And finally, the first thing that I actually started reading as a young kid was comic books, and specifically Ninja Turtles comics. And I loved the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Of course, I watched the cartoon. I was a kid growing up in the '80s. It was pretty much mandatory. I think I would have been shipped out of the country if I didn't, watch it in some way. But I loved it. Raphael was always my favorite. He was a loner. he thought that he was too cool for the others in a lot of ways. But with Splinter and the Turtles and the whole family aspect, again, you had that kind of the team aspect, and more deeply, like I said, this family element that was very important to me, and I think that was captured really well with the Turtles. And of course, in the comics, you especially have the whole kind of science fiction element. I remember in second grade, I was very proud of the fact that I memorized the word or the phrase biomechanical integration. I thought that I was really clever. And so, at a pretty young age, it got me, into the concepts of cybernetics and mutation and time travel. Because this particular story arc that I'm talking about with the villain Armagon and, the Turtles being kind of besieged by all these dark, technological forces was a dystopian future, somewhat like Days of Future Past in X-Men. And it got me into the whole dystopian future, setting in fiction, like 1984, which I would later read, or A Clockwork Orange or things like that. Some of the stuff that I really like. And in the event, yeah. So these early stories that I was exposed to early in my life were very formative for me. I not only look back on them fondly, but I think that they really shaped a lot of my worldview and my taste. So I just wanted to put the question back to you. Did the early stories that you can first remember hearing or experiencing in your life really shape you as a person? Do you think that kind of storytelling is important and indispensable for the growth of a young person? Please let me know what you think. Don't fail to comment. And as usual, I just hope you're doing well and take care. And I will talk to you later.